Now, you mentioned this whole story about what's going on in the libraries, and I am so pleased that we have joined here at the desk with us child and adolescent psychologist Clare Rowe. Clare, welcome so much to Outsiders here. Great to have you. Tell us a bit more about this Rainbow program in the libraries, and as an expert in child mental health development, why is this necessary?
Well, as Rita said, I mean, I think at best it's unnecessary and absurd. And at worst, it's just dangerous. I mean, I have so many issues with this. I think 10 to 15 years ago, would this have gotten up? And I think, first of all, I think it just shows how far we've come to just... I think the majority of parents would be against this, but we're not speaking up. And I just don't think this would have got up 15 years ago. But now it just shows we're just that frog boiling in water, and that we're just allowing these extremists, you know, even colleagues of mine this week said, oh, I think you're making a storm out of a teacup about this, Clare. But really? Really? I mean, you know, so developmentally, first of all, as you said, we were talking about 5-year-olds. I mean, their concept of gender is so concrete in thinking and based on kind of observable physical characteristics. And a lot of 5-year-olds are still trying to get language acquisition and know that, you know, males are he. And if you've got kids in your life, you know they switch them up all the time and you're correcting them. And now we're gonna say, well, no, actually, it's just a free-for-all, and it's very confusing.
I've read through the 48-page guidebook, and I wonder how many of your colleagues who think this is no big deal have actually bothered to do that. I'm asking a 5-year-old whether they identify as they, them, or he, she. I mean, it's absurd, but I think it's even dangerous for those kids who perhaps don't fit the stereotype. I was a tomboy growing up. If these people got hold of me, they would have probably put me on some puberty blockers and been transitioning me by the age of 12, because there are girls who are not very girly, boys who are a little bit more feminine, but that doesn't mean they're not boys and girls or that they need medication for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think like most things, you know, the pendulum was swinging and it's just gone way too far now. But we hit some kind of sweet spot around the kind of, I don't know, early 2000s, where we started talking as parents about how, well, you know, kids can play with whatever toy they want.
Yes.
Kids can dress however they want. You know, and I really like that idea that we can kind of just raise kids in this environment where, you know, if my daughter wants to play with trucks, go for it. And there's not this kind of idea of gendered pressures on them, of stereotypes.
But there is now.
But there is now. And that's what I mean. Ironically, it's kind of, you know, doing the opposite. Instead of having this neutral environment where they can just be who they want to be, suddenly we're asking them over and over, are you sure you're not the opposite, and are you sure you're not this? And, you know, so actually, I think, achieving, ironically, the opposite of what we were trying to do.
And often on the most superficial stuff. If a boy likes pink, is it body?
Yeah.
Claire, as Rita said earlier, there's zero need for this. It's not like anybody is being discriminated against when they go to get a book. You said at best this is confusing. It seems to me like there's a ploy here to implant ideas in children's heads that they would otherwise never come to think of. Parents would certainly never talk about it. Is that the more sinister aspect of this?
Yeah, it is, and not just implanting ideas in their heads, but the Victorian government haven't put this advice out to parents of how to talk to your children about it. They've selected public servants, librarians. I mean, what qualification does a librarian have in this way? And I'm really worried that, you know, there's a power dynamic there for a young child with an adult in a position of kind of knowledgeable authority, that children are very susceptible.
Right.
But, you know, it's not just this particular thing. We're seeing this all over the place. Yumi Stein, who some of our viewers may be familiar with, her graphic, and I mean really graphic, and we won't go into this because it's Sunday morning and maybe we just shouldn't do that sort of thing. She's got a book called Welcome to Sex, and it's for kids as young as 8, not 18, 8, and it talks about all sorts of things, porn, sexting, and a lot of things that are fairly out there in terms of sexual practices. This has been shortlisted now for the Prime Minister's Literary Awards. There are no words. Claire.
There are no words. No. Again, I've had colleagues say this is very good for children.
How?
Well, I mean, the children really need this good sex education. And I do agree it's harder for parents. I think in our generation, when we asked parents to explain anything, they had the option of saying, tell you when you're older. And these days, kids Google it. And so there is a need for good anatomical, correct information out there, which we've always had in books. As you said, this goes into some pretty extreme sex practices that I think for adults on the desk on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, we can't show them here.
For adults,
Yes.
and there is graphics and descriptions in this book, which apparently a mature 8-year-old can enjoy, and is, I think, targeted for 10 to 15-year-olds. We can't show it on an adult program, and yet a mature 8-year-old and the Prime Minister's endorsing it by shortlisting it for an award. But what sort of a country are we living?
Claire, does this, I mean, I know we see the surveys about, when young people start to have sexual relations and things like this, but it would seem to me that this sort of thing would be encouraging kids to think about things that, are pretty smutty, and smut's fine if you're an adult, but not when you're 8, that they're encouraging kids to think, maybe experiment, do things much younger than they should.
Well, we've thrown out completely the idea of information delivered to children at different stages. The same with the gender issue.
And by their parents.
And by their parents, exactly. And this whole idea that we've talked about a lot, James, about the shortening of childhood. That there is no childhood anymore.
But how is it that we have this sort of weird thing where it seems like we have a shortened childhood but then an extended adolescence that lasts forever?
Yeah, that's true. But developmentally, there is no way a 12-year-old, 14-year-old, older should be having some of these concepts in this book. Some of them, yes. Okay, some of them are very basic, kind of where do babies come from discussions. But there is information in that book that I would not want my teenager reading about. As you said, they wouldn't even be aware of it or on their radar anyway. And yeah, for the Prime Minister now to endorse it, I mean, I just think that speaks volumes on, as you said, where the country's at.
Well, this is another thing I can't work out. How is this listed for a literary award? I mean, I've read part of it. The spelling is correct. There's pretty much correct grammar, but it's not Gone with the Wind.
There we go, yeah.
So how on earth does this book get up as one of the great books in Australian literature this year? It makes no sense.
It doesn't.
Unless there's an agenda being pushed.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know what exactly the criteria. I would have thought a literary work should have some type of
I think it's
artistic
the only book
merit to it.
shortlisted that has a section on scissoring, so there's that in here. Are we allowed to talk about that on Sunday morning?
We're talking about arts and crafts, right? We're talking about arts and crafts, everybody.
Everyone's now Googling what scissoring is.
But this is, again, we keep saying it, but the author herself said, a mature 8-year-old could look at this book. 8-year-old.
I don't understand what 8-year-old she's hanging out with. I mean, an 8-year-old would be very intrigued and shocked and probably quite traumatised if they're reading some of this information of what people apparently like to do to each other, because that's how graphic it goes into it.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's just absolutely shocking. Prime Minister, if you're watching, I'm sure you're watching on a Sunday morning, maybe have a word to the people doing the literary awards thing and say, Let's strike this one off. I mean, surely there's some Little House on the Prairie or something like that the kids could be reading. Anyway, thank you so much, child and adolescent psychologist Clare Rowe. I appreciate it. And the arts and crafts description from Rita.